I saw my daughter-in-law Ashley throwing my granddaughter Isabella's baby blanket into the trash. I didn't think twice. I ran toward the dumpster and rescued it before it was too late. Thinking of Isabella, I grabbed that blanket and took it straight to my house. The autumn wind bit at my cheeks as I watched from my parked car across the street. Ashley emerged from the garage, dragging several black trash bags with surprising force. Her designer jeans and cashmere sweater seemed out of place for such a mundane task. But it wasn't her outfit that made my heart stop. It was what I glimpsed hanging from one of those bags. A corner of mint green fabric with delicate lace edging. Isabella's blanket. The one I had knitted with my own hands. For 6 weeks I had worked on that blanket, my arthritic fingers pushing through the pain. Each stitch was a testament to my love for my granddaughter. Matthew had called it magical, claiming that whenever he wrapped Isabella in it, she would stop crying almost immediately. My son had treasured that blanket. Yet here was his widow shoving it into a dumpster with such violence as if she hated everything it represented. I watched as Ashley slammed the dumpster lid shut and marched back into the house, her shoulders rigid with tension. The perfect posture of a woman carrying secrets. I sat frozen, my breathing shallow, a strange mixture of anger and bewilderment washing over me. When I was certain she wouldn't return, I exited my car, my legs carrying me toward the dumpster before my mind could catch up with what I was doing. The metallic lid was heavier than I expected. The smell of rot and discarded food assaulted my nostrils as I peered inside. I pushed aside bags until I found it. Mint green fabric now soiled with coffee grounds and what appeared to be yesterday's leftovers. I pulled it free, cradling it against my chest like a wounded animal, and hurried back to my car. I drove home with the blanket beside me on the passenger seat, a silent companion carrying more history than I yet understood. At 69, I had learned to trust my instincts, and everything within me screamed that Ashley's disposal of this precious item wasn't merely a decluttering decision. It was an act of erasure. My name is Eleanor Harrison, and I have lived alone in this 2-story colonial home for 15 years since my husband Robert died of a heart attack. For 3 of those years, I've been without my only son. The house feels too big sometimes, the silence too loud, but today the familiar walls offered sanctuary as I locked the door behind me and headed straight to my bedroom. I spread the blanket carefully on my queen-sized bed, the same bed where Robert and I had spent 32 years together. The mint green color looked dull under the lamplight, stained in places, but still intact. My fingers, gnarled from age and arthritis, moved methodically across the fabric, reacquainting themselves with every stitch they had once created. That's when I felt it, near the center of the blanket. Something hard rectangular hidden between the layers of cotton. Not part of the stuffing. Something deliberately placed there. My heart quickened its pace as I retrieved a pair of scissors from my bedside drawer. With trembling hands, I carefully snipped at the seam, creating a small opening away from the original stitching. When my fingers touched cold metal, a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the October air seeping through my old windows. I extracted a small USB drive, its silver surface glinting accusingly in the light. Whatever secrets it held had been important enough for someone to hide inside my granddaughter's blanket. Important enough for Ashley to want to destroy. My ancient laptop protested as I booted it up the fan, whirring loudly in the quiet of my bedroom. When I inserted the USB drive, a single folder appeared labeled Insurance. The name itself sent another chill down my spine. Insurance against what, against whom? The folder contained dozens of files, journal entries, voice recordings, and videos. I clicked on the first text document dated 18 months before Matthew's death. My son's familiar writing style leaped off the screen, methodical, precise, the words of a doctor accustomed to detailed documentation. I've been experiencing unusual symptoms for approximately 3 weeks now, he had written. Persistent headaches, episodes of nausea, muscle weakness, particularly in the mornings. Initially attributed to stress from the Henderson case and long shifts, but symptoms aren't following the pattern I'd expect from exhaustion. I scrolled through more entries, each more concerning than the last. 6 months later, weight loss now at 12 pounds despite no change in diet, hair thinning noticeably, blood work ordered through Collins rather than hospital lab. Ashley concerned, but something feels off about her reaction, rehearsed somehow. Am I becoming paranoid? 3 months before his death, the entries took a darker turn. Symptoms worsen after meals Ashley prepares. Improvement when eating at hospital or when preparing my own food. The thought that's forming is unthinkable. I've begun discarding portions of meals when she's not looking, collecting samples for testing. Tears blurred my vision as I read my son's words, his growing suspicion transforming into terrible clarity. The final text entry, dated just 1 week before his death, felt like a physical blow. Blood and hair samples confirm presence of thallium, non-accidental poisoning, no natural sources in our home, only one conclusion possible: need to secure evidence and protect Isabella before confrontation. If something happens to me, this drive contains everything. Mother, if you're reading this, I'm so sorry. My son knew. He knew he was being poisoned and was gathering evidence. Evidence that someone, Ashley, had made sure was hidden away after his death. But she hadn't destroyed it. Why? And why had she suddenly decided to dispose of it now? 3 years later, I moved to the audio files, my finger hesitating over the play button. Was I ready to hear my son's voice again? The voice that used to call me every Sunday without fail. The voice that had announced with such joy that I would be a grandmother. I pressed play. Audio log, September 3rd. Matthew's voice filled my bedroom, and I pressed a hand to my mouth to stifle a sob. He sounded tired, his words slightly slurred. I've installed cameras in the kitchen home office in our bedroom. If you're listening to this and I'm gone, if something's happened to me, it wasn't an accident. Ashley is not who I thought she was. And Isabella, his voice broke here. Isabella needs protection. She's not safe with Ashley. There's more on this drive. Evidence, names, patterns I've discovered. Find Detective Roberts at Boston PD. He'll know what to do. The recording ended, leaving me in silence, broken only by my ragged breathing. I felt as though the floor beneath me had disappeared. My mind struggled to reconcile the Ashley I knew, the beautiful nurse who had made my son so happy, the mother who seemed to dote on Isabella, with this monster Matthew was describing. But I had seen the cold calculation in her eyes when she threw away that blanket. I had noticed how she'd changed after Matthew's death, how she'd gradually restricted my access to my granddaughter. I clicked on one of the video files. The footage was grainy, shot from what appeared to be a hidden camera in the kitchen. Ashley moved around the space with practiced efficiency, preparing 2 plates of pasta. Then she reached into her pocket and sprinkled something over just one portion before mixing it thoroughly into the sauce. Later in the video, she called Matthew for dinner, serving him the doctored plate while taking the untouched one for herself. My hands shook as I exited the video. I couldn't watch any more, not now. The implications were too horrifying, too enormous to process all at once. My son had been murdered, methodically poisoned by his wife, and somehow Isabella was caught in the middle of it. I remembered the day Matthew died with painful clarity. It was a Tuesday afternoon in September, unusually warm. I had been gardening, planting bulbs for spring flowers that Matthew would never see. The phone rang, and Ashley's voice came through in broken sobs, telling me Matthew had fallen down the stairs at their home, that he'd hit his head badly, that the paramedics were working on him. I drove to the hospital like a madwoman, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel, prayer after desperate prayer falling from my lips. When I arrived at the emergency room, Ashley sat in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs, her face buried in her hands. She wore a pearl gray dress with blood on the sleeves. Matthew's blood. When she saw me, she ran toward me, embraced me, cried against my shoulder. I had comforted her. I had held the woman who killed my son and offered her solace. A doctor emerged from the trauma room, his face bearing that universal expression of defeat that medical professionals develop when they're about to deliver the worst news. Matthew had died from severe head trauma. They had tried everything. He was gone. I screamed. I collapsed on the cold hospital floor. Ashley knelt beside me, telling me everything would be all right, that Matthew would have wanted us to be strong. But nothing was all right. Nothing would ever be all right again. The memory shifted to 3 years earlier, Matthew bringing Ashley home to meet me for the first time. She wore a cream-colored dress that day, her smile dazzling, too perfect. But Matthew was clearly besotted. His eyes shone when he looked at her. He told me she was the woman of his life, that he wanted to start a family with her. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe my brilliant doctor son had found true happiness. And when Ashley announced her pregnancy a year after their wedding, Matthew's joy seemed complete. They bought a new house in a good school district. Matthew painted the nursery himself a soft pink because they knew they were having a girl. He assembled the crib, spending an entire weekend making sure every screw was perfectly secure. When Isabella was born, I felt life had given me a second chance at family. She was tiny, perfect, with Matthew's dark eyes. I knitted that mint green blanket while sitting beside her crib, watching her chest rise and fall with each precious breath. Matthew adored that blanket. "It's magic, Mom," he would say, demonstrating how Isabella would immediately calm when wrapped in it. After Matthew's death, everything changed. Ashley became distant, which I initially attributed to grief. She had lost her husband. She needed time and space. But as months passed, she brought Isabella to visit less and less frequently. There were always excuses. The baby had a cold. Ashley had extra shifts at the hospital. They were meeting friends. I didn't want to be the interfering mother-in-law, so I respected her boundaries. I called instead of dropping by unannounced. I asked politely if I could see my granddaughter rather than demanding access. Sometimes Ashley would agree. Other times, she wouldn't even answer my calls. When she did permit visits with Isabella, I noticed troubling changes in Ashley. The warmth that had once seemed so natural, if slightly affected, had vanished completely. Her gaze had turned calculating, almost predatory. She watched my interactions with Isabella with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, but I chalked it up to grief changing her as it had changed me. Now I understood it wasn't grief I'd been seeing. It was fear of discovery. Ashley had been watching me to ensure I never got too close to whatever secret she was hiding. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in years. James Roberts had been my husband's friend from college, their relationship maintained through annual fishing trips and holiday cards. When Robert died, James had been a pallbearer at the funeral. He attended Matthew's funeral as well, though by then he and I rarely spoke. He was a detective with the Boston Police Department, nearing retirement after a distinguished career. If anyone would listen to an old woman with an outlandish story about murder and hidden flash drives, it would be James. I hesitated before calling, suddenly aware of how this might sound. A grieving mother unable to accept her son's accidental death, constructing elaborate conspiracy theories 3 years after the fact. But the evidence wasn't in my imagination. It was on the USB drive beside me. Matthew's own words, his recordings, his videos. Evidence he had carefully compiled, knowing his life was in danger. Before I could press the call button, my phone lit up with an incoming call. Ashley's name flashed on the screen. My heart lurched painfully in my chest as I answered, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Eleanor, hi, it's Ashley." Her voice sounded artificially bright. "I was wondering if you've seen Isabella's green blanket, the one you made for her. I can't find it anywhere, and she's been crying for it all afternoon." The lie came surprisingly easily. "No, I haven't seen it since your last visit. Have you checked under her bed? She likes to hide things there sometimes." "I've looked everywhere," Ashley replied, a note of tension creeping into her voice. "She's inconsolable. I thought maybe I left it at your house last time. I'm sorry I haven't seen it, but I could knit her another one if you'd like." I offered, testing her reaction. There was a pause slightly too long. "That's sweet of you, but she wants that specific one. If you happen to find it, would you let me know right away? It's really important to her." Important to Isabella, or important to Ashley? I wondered what she thought might be hidden in that blanket. Did she know about the USB drive, or was she concerned about something else entirely? "Of course I will." I promised, the falsehood bitter on my tongue. "Give Isabella my love." After hanging up, I stared at the phone in my hand. Ashley was looking for the blanket with unusual urgency. She must have realized something was hidden inside something she needed to eliminate. My window of opportunity was closing rapidly. I called James Roberts immediately. When he answered, his voice was exactly as I remembered. Deep, slightly gruff, no nonsense. I identified myself, reminding him of our connection through Robert and Matthew. "Eleanor, of course I remember you. It's been a while. How are you holding up?" The simple question nearly broke my composure. How was I holding up? I was discovering that my son was murdered by his wife, that my granddaughter might be in danger, that everything I thought I knew about the past 3 years was built on lies. "James, I need your help. It's about Matthew's death. I found evidence that it wasn't an accident." The words tumbled out before I could second-guess myself. There was a pause on the line. "Evidence? What kind of evidence, Eleanor?" "Documents, recordings, videos. Matthew believed he was being poisoned by Ashley. He was collecting proof before he died." Even saying it aloud sounded fantastical. "I know how this sounds, but please just look at what I've found. For Matthew's sake." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him weighing his response, deciding whether this was the delusion of a grieving mother or something that merited investigation. I can come by tomorrow morning around 10. Would that work? Relief flooded through me. He was at least willing to listen. Yes, thank you. I'll have everything ready to show you. After hanging up, I turned back to the laptop. There was so much more to go through before James arrived. I needed to understand the full scope of what Matthew had uncovered to be prepared with the most compelling evidence. I opened another video file. This one showed Matthew in his home office late at night based on the darkness outside the window. He looked ill. Thin, his complexion, gray hair noticeably sparse. He was carefully removing several strands of hair, placing them in a small evidence bag, and sealing it with trembling hands. The date stamp indicated this was just 2 weeks before his death. The next file was more disturbing. It showed Ashley in their bedroom on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. "It's taking too long," she was saying. "He's getting suspicious, Hugh. I found him looking through my things yesterday." A pause as she listened to the response. "No, I increased the dose like you said. He's definitely sicker, but he's still going to work, still functioning." Another pause. "If the poison doesn't work soon, we'll need another plan. I can't risk him finding anything. Think about Isabella." Hugh. A name I didn't recognize. An accomplice. And what did Isabella have to do with their plans? I opened another text document, this one revealing Matthew's growing suspicions about Isabella's parentage. "Blood type inconsistency discovered during Isabella's routine checkup," he had written. "Neither my type nor Ashley's would produce Isabella's. Requested DNA testing quietly through a lab contact. Ashley doesn't know. If Isabella isn't biologically ours, where did she come from? And why the deception?" The implications were staggering. If Isabella wasn't their biological child, who was she? Had Ashley somehow acquired her? Was that connected to Matthew's murder? I sifted through more files, piecing together a horrifying narrative. Matthew had been investigating patient deaths at the hospital where both he and Ashley worked. He'd noticed a pattern: wealthy patients or those with sizable insurance policies dying unexpectedly under Ashley's care. He'd begun tracking these incidents, collecting records, looking for connections. And he'd found them. Ashley had worked at 3 different hospitals in the past decade, each with similar patterns of suspicious deaths. She changed jobs every few years, moved to new cities, sometimes even altered her appearance slightly. Matthew had compiled photographs showing these transformations. Subtle changes in hair color, weight, style of dress. Enough to complicate facial recognition searches, but not enough to raise suspicions among new colleagues. Most damning was a spreadsheet tracking financial windfalls that corresponded with patient deaths. Insurance policies naming Ashley as beneficiary, unexpected bequests in wills changed shortly before death-valuable items disappearing from patients' personal effects. My son had unknowingly married a serial killer, a predator who moved from hospital to hospital, identifying vulnerable targets, insinuating herself into their lives, and eventually killing them for profit. And when Matthew began to uncover her true nature, he became her next victim. But what about Isabella? Where did she fit into this terrible puzzle? I found my answer in a folder labeled Summers Lydia. Inside were medical records for a 29-year-old woman diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. Beautiful despite her illness, with dark eyes strikingly similar to Isabella's. According to the records, Lydia had been admitted to Massachusetts General Hospital 2 years before Isabella's birth, with Ashley assigned as her primary nurse. Matthew's notes were meticulous. Lydia Summers, heiress to the Summers Hotel chain. Estimated net worth $42 million, terminal diagnosis. 8 months pregnant at time of admission. No family involvement noted. Ashley specifically requested this assignment. Further files revealed that Lydia had died unexpectedly from complications 2 weeks before her due date. The baby, delivered by emergency C-section, had survived. There was no record of what happened to the infant afterward. The timing aligned perfectly with Ashley's sudden pregnancy announcement. My hand flew to my mouth as realization dawned. Isabella wasn't just not their biological child. She had been stolen from a dying woman. Ashley had somehow arranged to take Lydia's baby and pass it off as her own. And when Matthew discovered this horrific truth, he became a liability that needed to be eliminated. I sat back, overwhelmed by the magnitude of these revelations. My son had been murdered to protect this secret. And my granddaughter, no, not my granddaughter by blood, but still the child I loved, was the daughter of one of Ashley's victims. Did Ashley plan to use Isabella to access Lydia Summers' fortune somehow? Was that her endgame? The room felt suddenly airless, the walls closing in. I needed to protect Isabella, but how Ashley was her legal mother on all documentation, I had no standing, no rights. And making accusations without proper legal channels could backfire catastrophically, potentially putting Isabella at even greater risk if Ashley felt cornered. James Roberts was my only hope. A seasoned detective would know how to handle this properly, how to build a case that would hold up in court, how to ensure Isabella's safety throughout the process. I spent the night organizing the evidence, creating a timeline, preparing to present everything as clearly as possible. Sleep was impossible with my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. What if James didn't believe me? What if Ashley discovered I had the USB drive? What if she harmed Isabella in a panic? Morning came with no answers, just deepening worry lines on my already aged face. I made coffee and waited, jumping at every sound from the street, expecting Ashley to appear at my door, demanding the blanket and the secrets it contained. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. James Roberts stood on my porch, looking older than I remembered, but still imposing in his 6-foot frame. Gray had completely overtaken his once brown hair, and deep lines bracketed his mouth, but his eyes remained sharp, assessing. "Eleanor," he greeted me with a gentle nod. "It's been too long." I ushered him inside, grateful that some vestiges of social norms remained intact despite my world crumbling around me. I offered coffee, which he accepted, and we sat at my kitchen table. The same table where Matthew had done his homework as a boy, where he'd later introduced Ashley as his fiancée, where I now prepared to prove she was his killer. "I know how this might sound," I began, my hands clasped tightly around my mug. "But please just look at everything before you decide." James nodded, his expression neutral but not dismissive. "Show me what you've found, Eleanor. I'll give it fair consideration." I led him to my laptop where I had queued up the most compelling evidence. Matthew's journal entries, the videos of Ashley tampering with food, the recordings of her conversations with her accomplice Hugh, the financial records showing her pattern of benefiting from deaths. I explained how I had discovered the USB drive hidden in Isabella's blanket, how Ashley had suddenly tried to dispose of it, how she'd called searching for it with unusual urgency. As James reviewed the material, his professional detachment gradually gave way to focused intensity. He asked sharp questions, took notes, occasionally backed up to review certain segments again. When he finally looked up, the skepticism I had feared was nowhere in his expression. Instead, I saw grim determination. "This is substantial, Eleanor. Far more than I expected." His voice was measured, controlled. Matthew compiled a compelling case. The poisoning allegations alone warrant investigation, but this pattern of behavior across multiple hospitals, multiple victims. This is serial predation. Hope fluttered in my chest. "You believe me. You'll help." "I believe the evidence, and yes, I'll help, but we need to proceed carefully." He leaned forward, his expression grave. "Ashley is clearly dangerous and calculating. If she suspects we're investigating, she might run with Isabella, or worse." The unspoken implication hung heavy between us. If Ashley felt truly cornered, who knew what she might do to cover her tracks, even to Isabella? "What's our next step?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. "First, I'll open an unofficial inquiry. Quiet background work without alerting her. We need to verify Matthew's findings, establish chain of custody for this evidence, and build a solid case before making any official moves." He outlined his plan. Discreet interviews with hospital staff, verification of the financial patterns Matthew had identified, background checks on Ashley, and the mysterious Hugh, possibly exhumation of Matthew's body to test for thallium poisoning. All done with utmost discretion to avoid tipping off Ashley. "And Isabella?" I couldn't keep the fear from my voice. "How do we protect her while this is happening?" James's expression softened. "That's complicated, Eleanor. Legally, Ashley is her mother. Without evidence of current abuse or neglect, we can't simply remove Isabella from her custody. Our best protection for her right now is proceeding carefully and building an airtight case." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but I understood the reality. The law moved deliberately, methodically, sometimes frustratingly slowly. But it was moving now. The truth would come out. Justice for Matthew, and for Lydia Summers, and who knew how many others, was finally within reach. As James prepared to leave, promising to call me with updates regularly, my phone rang. Ashley again. James nodded for me to answer, moving close to listen. Eleanor, I'm sorry to bother you again, but I'm really concerned about this blanket situation. Her voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. Isabella won't stop asking for it. I was thinking I might stop by this afternoon to look around your house, if that's okay. Sometimes kids hide things in the strangest places. My blood ran cold at the thought of Ashley in my home searching for the blanket while knowing exactly what it contained. I forced calm into my voice. That's really not necessary, Ashley. I've looked everywhere. I insist, she replied, the pretense of warmth dropping from her tone. Isabella needs her blanket. I'll be there at 3. She hung up before I could respond. James and I exchanged looks of alarm. She's panicking, he said quietly. The missing blanket has her worried. We need to secure that USB drive before she arrives. He thought for a moment. I'll take it now. Create a secure backup at the station. You should put the blanket back together as best you can. Make it look like you found it wadded up behind a piece of furniture or something. Give it to her when she comes. Is that safe? What if she realizes the USB drive is gone? The alternative is refusing to give her the blanket, which would only increase her suspicion. This way, she might believe Isabella simply removed the drive herself, playing with it as a toy. Children are curious. It made sense, but fear still clawed at my throat. What if she doesn't believe me? What if she... James placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. I'll have a patrol car in the area. Call me the moment she arrives, and I'll make an excuse to stop by shortly after. You won't face her alone. After he left with the USB drive, I carefully repaired the seam I had cut, making the stitches as invisible as possible. The blanket looked almost normal, though the slight bulge where the drive had been was noticeably absent. Would Ashley detect the difference immediately? Would she confront me? At precisely 3 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I had faced worse fears in my 69 years. Robert's death, Matthew's funeral, countless nights alone with grief. As my only companion, I could face this woman who had taken so much from me. I had to for Isabella's sake, for justice. Ashley stood on my porch looking immaculate as always in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves. Isabella wasn't with her. A small mercy. At least the child wouldn't witness whatever was about to unfold. Eleanor, thank you for letting me come by. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Have you had any luck finding the blanket? I feigned surprise, turning toward the living room. Actually, just this morning it had fallen behind the armchair from your last visit. Come in, I'll get it for you. I retrieved the blanket from where I'd placed it on the couch, watching Ashley's reaction carefully. Her eyes fixed on it instantly, a flash of something. Relief, anxiety, crossing her features before her practiced smile returned. Oh, wonderful, Isabella will be so happy. She reached for it, but I held it a moment longer than necessary, forcing her to meet my eyes. It's strange that she's so attached to this particular blanket, I said conversationally. Matthew always said it was magical. A flicker of discomfort passed across her face at the mention of my son's name. Children form attachments to comfort objects. It's perfectly normal developmental behavior. Of course. I released the blanket into her waiting hands, noticing how quickly her fingers began exploring the fabric, searching for the hidden object she knew should be there. Would you like some tea while you're here? She barely glanced up from her examination. No, thank you. I should get back to Isabella. She's with a sitter. I watched as her exploration became more frantic, her fingers pressing more firmly against the blanket, searching for the telltale hardness of the USB drive. When she didn't find it, her eyes lifted to mine, the mask of politeness slipping to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. Is something wrong? I asked innocently. The blanket seems fine to me. A bit dirty from being behind the furniture, but otherwise intact. Ashley stared at me, her mind visibly racing behind those beautiful blue eyes. Did she suspect I had found the drive, or would she assume it had fallen out somewhere else? After what felt like an eternity, her social mask slid back into place. No, nothing's wrong. I'm just glad to have found it. Isabella will be thrilled. She clutched the blanket tightly against her chest. Thank you for looking for it. Anything for my granddaughter, I replied, emphasizing the relationship that she had tried so hard to diminish. As she turned to leave, the doorbell rang again. James Roberts stood there in his detective suit badge, visible on his belt. He feigned surprise at seeing Ashley. Mrs. Harrison, I didn't realize you had company. I just stopped by to follow up on that noise complaint from last night. The neighbors reported hearing some disturbance. There had been no noise complaint, of course, but Ashley wouldn't know that. I played along. "Detective Roberts, please come in. This is my daughter-in-law, Ashley Harrison." Ashley Detective Roberts was a friend of Roberts. I watched the color drain slightly from Ashley's face as she nodded a greeting, clutching Isabella's blanket even tighter. "I was just leaving, actually. Isabella is waiting for her blanket." "Don't rush off on my account," James said pleasantly. "This won't take long." Ashley's eyes darted between us, assessing, calculating. I could almost see the gears turning behind her carefully maintained expression. Had she connected James's presence to the missing USB drive? Did she suspect we knew her secrets? "Really, I need to go. The sitter can only stay until 4. She edged toward the door. "Eleanor, thank you again for finding the blanket. I'll bring Isabella by to visit soon, I promise." It was the same promise she'd made countless times before and never kept, but this time the hollow words carried an additional layer of menace. Would there be a soon for any of us after today? James and I watched from the doorway as Ashley hurried to her car, the blanket still clutched against her chest. As she drove away, a weight settled in the pit of my stomach. The game had begun. Ashley now knew, or at least strongly suspected, that her secret was out. What would her next move be, and how could we ensure Isabella's safety in the coming storm? "You did well," James said quietly, closing the door. "But things will move quickly now. She'll check the blanket more thoroughly when she gets home, confirm the drive is missing. She'll wonder if you found it, or if it fell out somewhere else." "What will she do?" My voice sounded frail, even to my own ears. "If she's as calculating as she appears from Matthew's evidence, she'll try to determine how much we know before making any drastic moves. She has a carefully constructed life that she won't abandon without reason." He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We have the advantage now, Eleanor. We know what she's done. We have evidence. And most importantly, she doesn't know exactly what we know." I nodded, trying to draw strength from his confidence. But as I looked out the window toward the street where Ashley's car had disappeared, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had awakened something dangerous. A predator who had killed before and would not hesitate to kill again to protect her secrets. The thought of Isabella in that woman's care made my heart constrict painfully. The child wasn't my biological granddaughter, but that changed nothing about how I felt toward her. She was an innocent caught in Ashley's web of deception and death. Somehow I had to find a way to protect her, to give her the love and safety that her mother, her real mother, Lydia Summers, would have wanted for her. As James made calls to expedite the investigation, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Matthew had once sat as a child, safe and loved. I made a silent promise to him, to Lydia, to Isabella. The truth would come out. Justice would be served. And no matter what happened, Isabella would know love. Real love, not the counterfeit version Ashley had manufactured as part of her deadly masquerade. The battle lines were drawn. Ashley had taken my son from me. I would not let her take anything more. James Roberts didn't waste time. Within hours of Ashley's departure, he had assembled a small, trusted team to begin the delicate process of investigating her without triggering her suspicions. I sat in my living room while he made calls, each one revealing more pieces of the horrifying puzzle my son had started to assemble before his death. The USB drive contained more than we initially discovered. James found hidden directories with additional evidence. Medical records of patients who had died under suspicious circumstances, financial transactions tracing money from victims to offshore accounts, photographs of Ashley with different appearances at different hospitals. Most disturbing were the video files from cameras Matthew had secretly installed throughout their home, capturing damning conversations between Ashley and a man identified as Hugh Palmer. I watched the recordings with growing horror, my hands clenched so tightly my arthritic joints screamed in protest. Ashley and Hugh spoke casually about Matthew's deteriorating health, discussing dosages of thallium with the clinical detachment of scientists conducting an experiment rather than people murdering a husband and father. "He's getting too suspicious," Ashley said in one, recording her back to the hidden camera as she mixed something into a protein shake. "Yesterday he asked why I never drink these when I make them for him." Hugh's voice replied from a phone on speaker. "Just tell him yours has different supplements for women. He's a doctor, but even doctors believe what they want to believe when it's someone they trust." Ashley laughed, the sound chilling in its genuine amusement. "Trust is the easiest thing to manipulate. I've got him convinced I'm the perfect wife, the perfect mother. He has no idea." James paused the video, his expression grim. "We've identified Hugh Palmer. He's a pharmacist at Massachusetts General, where both Matthew and Ashley worked. He has a sealed record from 15 years ago, domestic violence charges that were later dropped when the victim recanted. No wonder Matthew had become suspicious. As a doctor, he would have recognized the symptoms of thallium poisoning once they progressed sufficiently: the hair loss, peripheral neuropathy, gastrointestinal distress. How terrifying it must have been to realize the person sharing his bed, raising his child, no, not his child, was slowly killing him. James continued explaining his findings as his team worked. We've confirmed that Lydia Summers was admitted to Mass General 3 years and 8 months ago with stage 4 breast cancer while in her 3rd trimester. Ashley specifically requested to be assigned to her case, which wasn't unusual given her specialization in oncology nursing at the time. I studied the photograph of Lydia that Matthew had saved. Even ill, her resemblance to Isabella was striking. The same dark eyes, the same delicate nose. How had no one noticed? How had Matthew not seen it until it was too late? Lydia died 2 weeks before her due date from what was recorded as complications related to her cancer treatment. James continued. The baby was delivered via emergency C-section and survived. Hospital records show the infant was released to social services since Lydia had no listed family contacts. But that's not what happened, I said softly. Ashley took her. James nodded. We're still piecing together how exactly. There are irregularities in the documentation, signatures that don't match timestamps that conflict with staff schedules. Someone falsified records to make it appear the baby went through proper channels when in reality Ashley was creating a paper trail to claim the child as her own. The enormity of Ashley's crimes was almost incomprehensible. She hadn't just murdered my son. She had stolen a baby from its dying mother, fabricated an entire identity, then killed Matthew when he discovered the truth. What about Lydia's family, her estate? I asked, thinking of Matthew's notes about the Summers Hotel fortune. That's where it gets even more complex, James replied. Lydia was estranged from her family. Her parents died in a boating accident when she was in college, leaving her the sole heir to the Summers Hotel chain. According to financial records, she'd been gradually liquidating assets in the years before her diagnosis. By the time she entered the hospital, most of her wealth had been converted to bearer bonds and offshore accounts, which disappeared after her death, I guessed. Exactly. Approximately $43 million untraceable. We believe Ashley accessed Lydia's financial information while caring for her and systematically emptied the accounts after her death. The phone rang, interrupting our conversation. James answered, his expression shifting from concentration to alarm as he listened. After a terse acknowledgement, he hung up and turned to me. Ashley's made a move. She just withdrew Isabella from preschool effective immediately. Told the administration they're relocating for a job opportunity. My heart lurched painfully. She's running. Not yet. My team has her under surveillance. She's at home right now packing, but she hasn't made any obvious escape preparations. No flight bookings, no large cash withdrawals. His eyes narrowed. She's too smart for that. She'll have contingency plans, possibly false identification documents, emergency funds. The thought of Isabella in Ashley's clutches being dragged into a life on the run was unbearable. We need to get Isabella away from her before she disappears. I'm working on expediting a court order, but without solid evidence of immediate danger to Isabella, it's challenging. Judges don't remove children from legal guardians without compelling reason. The USB drive Matthew's recordings are excellent evidence for a criminal investigation, but not necessarily proof of current danger to Isabella. Ashley hasn't harmed the child physically that we can document. I thought of Isabella alone with the woman who had murdered her father and stolen her from her dying mother. Every instinct screamed to protect her, but the law moved at its own pace, blind to the urgency burning in my chest. James must have seen my desperation. I've got a judge reviewing our evidence right now. The moment we have enough for a removal order, we'll move. In the meantime, we need to build our case methodically. I want to interview hospital staff who worked with Ashley during Lydia's hospitalization. The next 24 hours passed in a haze of activity. James's team worked tirelessly interviewing hospital personnel, reviewing security footage from the time of Lydia's death, comparing staffing records with Ashley's documented activities. I assisted where I could, identifying faces Matthew had photographed, connecting threads. His notes had begun to unravel. A breakthrough came when they located a former hospital administrator who had been pressured into early retirement shortly after Lydia's death. Melissa Donovan had questioned inconsistencies in the paperwork surrounding the baby's release, but her concerns were dismissed by her superiors. When she persisted, she found herself facing trumped-up accusations of procedural violations that threatened her pension. She was paid off, James explained after interviewing her. Not directly by Ashley, but through channels that lead back to Hugh Palmer's brother, a hospital board member who has since relocated to Arizona. The whole system was compromised. While James's team built their case, I remained in constant contact with the surveillance unit monitoring Ashley's home. She maintained a facade of normalcy, taking Isabella to the park grocery shopping, even scheduling a playdate that she later canceled with a vague excuse about Isabella feeling unwell. "She's watching and waiting," James said when I reported this. "Testing to see if she's being monitored. Standard behavior for someone planning to disappear." On the second morning, James arrived at my home with a court order in hand. "We've got it. Authorization to exhume Matthew's body for toxicology testing. If we can confirm thallium poisoning as cause of death, we'll have enough for arrest warrants for both Ashley and Hugh Palmer." The exhumation process was mercifully quick-handled with dignity and discretion. I couldn't bear to be present, so I waited at home, alternating between pacing and sitting motionless, staring at photographs of Matthew in happier times. In one taken just weeks before his death, I could see the signs I'd missed. The thinning hair, the gray pallor, the strain around his eyes as he smiled for the camera while holding Isabella on his lap. James called that evening. Preliminary tests confirmed presence of thallium at levels consistent with intentional poisoning. The ME also found evidence of blunt force trauma inconsistent with a fall down stairs, targeted blows to the back of the skull that suggest Matthew was struck from behind before the staged fall. Relief and grief collided within me. Confirmation of what we suspected brought no joy, only renewed pain at the deliberate cruelty of his murder. But it gave us what we needed. Will this be enough for the arrest? I'm filing for warrants now. We should have them within hours. But when the warrants came through the following morning, Ashley was already on the move. The surveillance team reported she had packed Isabella and several suitcases into her car and was heading north on I-95. "She must have been tipped off," James said grimly as we gathered in a hastily established command center at the police station. Someone in the system warned her the warrants were coming. My hands trembled as I clutched a cup of lukewarm coffee. "Hugh Palmer." "Possibly. We're tracking his movements, too. He called in sick to the hospital this morning." The surveillance team maintained visual contact with Ashley's vehicle as it continued north. A tracker had been placed on her car the previous day, a precaution that now proved critical. She drove steadily for 3 hours, eventually pulling into a secluded cabin retreat near the New Hampshire border. "That property is owned by a shell corporation linked to Hugh Palmer's brother," an analyst reported. "Tax records show it was purchased 6 years ago through an offshore account." James immediately dispatched tactical units to establish a perimeter around the property. "We can't risk a direct approach until we know the situation inside. If Ashley feels cornered, there's no telling what she might do." I thought of Isabella possibly asleep in a strange bed, unaware of the danger surrounding her. "We need to get that child out of there." "We will," James promised. "But we have to do it right." Thermal imaging revealed 3 heat signatures inside the cabin, one large, presumably Ashley, one smaller, likely Isabella, and a third adult-sized figure that matched Hugh Palmer's dimensions. They had reunited for their escape. The tactical team established surveillance points around the property, monitoring movements and communications. Palmer's vehicle was found hidden in a stand of trees half a mile away, suggesting they planned to switch cars to evade detection. As night fell, James allowed me to remain in the command van, though I knew he was bending protocols to do so. I couldn't bear to be anywhere else, not when Isabella's fate hung in the balance. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness, punctuated by terse updates from the surveillance teams. At 2:17 a.m., movement was detected. Hugh Palmer exited the cabin carrying what appeared to be travel documents and a laptop. He moved toward the location where his car was hidden. "We take him now quietly," James ordered, "before he can alert Ashley." The tactical team moved with precision, apprehending Palmer without a sound. He was secured and transported to a secondary location for immediate questioning while the perimeter around the cabin tightened. By dawn, Palmer had broken. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of multiple murder charges, he began cooperating in exchange for consideration during sentencing. His information confirmed our worst fears and revealed horrors we hadn't yet uncovered. Ashley Harrison wasn't even her real name. She had been born Vanessa Mills in rural Oklahoma, her early life marked by petty crimes and short con operations. She'd discovered her talent for medical manipulation during a brief stint as a hospital volunteer, realizing that healthcare settings offered both vulnerable targets and access to undetectable poisons. Over 15 years, she had moved through 7 different hospitals across 5 states, changing identities each time, leaving a trail of unexplained deaths and missing assets. Hugh had met her during her 3rd incarnation and become her accomplice, using his pharmaceutical knowledge to provide untraceable poisons and his hospital connections to help cover her tracks. Matthew had been her 8th husband. The others had all died from natural causes or accidents after she'd extracted whatever financial benefit they offered. But Matthew's case was different. He was meant to provide long-term legitimacy while she worked on her largest score, yet Lydia Summers and the fortune she controlled. The baby was the key, James explained after Palmer's interrogation. Lydia had established a complex trust that would revert to any biological children upon her death. With no children, the money would go to distant relatives. Ashley orchestrated the entire situation, getting assigned to Lydia's care, ensuring her death appeared natural, then stealing the baby to claim the inheritance. Matthew had discovered inconsistencies in Isabella's medical records during a routine pediatric visit. His subsequent investigation had led him to the truth about both his wife and the child he believed was his daughter. But before he could act on this knowledge, Ashley had decided he needed to be eliminated. Armed with Palmer's confession and a detailed understanding of the situation, James finalized the tactical plan to extract Isabella safely. Ashley remained inside the cabin with the child, unaware that her partner had been captured and her escape route compromised. "We'll approach at first light," James decided. "Negotiate her first, with clear demands for Isabella's safe release. Tactical teams in position for immediate intervention if necessary." I spent that night in prayer, something I hadn't done with regularity since Robert's death. Not formal prayers from my Methodist upbringing, but desperate pleas for Isabella's safety, for justice for Matthew and Lydia, and all the others who had fallen victim to Ashley's calculated evil. Dawn broke with oppressive gray clouds, threatening rain fitting backdrop for the drama about to unfold. I watched from the command van as the negotiator approached the cabin, his voice calm and authoritative as he called out to Ashley. "Ashley Harrison, this is the police. We have the cabin surrounded. Send Isabella out and we can resolve this peacefully." For long minutes there was no response. Thermal imaging showed the 2 heat signatures still inside, moving rapidly through the cabin's interior. Ashley was gathering things, perhaps looking for an escape route that didn't exist. The negotiator tried again. "Ashley, we know about Lydia Summers. We know about Matthew. We have Hugh in custody and he's told us everything. Your best option now is to release Isabella unharmed." A window opened and Ashley's voice cut through the morning air, the calm professional demeanor she'd always presented now shredded by panic and fury. "You don't know anything. Isabella is my daughter. Mine. I saved her from a mother who was already dead inside. I gave her everything." James motioned for me to join the negotiator, a calculated risk. Eleanor might be able to reach her, or at least distract her while the tactical team repositions. I moved forward on legs that felt simultaneously leaden and insubstantial, my heart pounding so hard I feared it might give out before I reached the clearing. The negotiator nodded almost imperceptibly as I approached. "Ashley," I called, my voice steadier than I would have thought possible. "Please think about Isabella. She's innocent in all of this. Let her come to me while you and the police sort things out." A harsh laugh answered me. "Of course you're here. The grieving mother and grandmother. Did you think I didn't know you found the USB drive? That I didn't see how you looked at me when you handed over that blanket? You've never been as clever as you think you are, Eleanor." Each word carried the venom of a cornered predator, but at least while she was focused on me, she wasn't focused on harming Isabella. I pressed on. "This isn't about me or you now. It's about that little girl who deserves to be safe. She deserves a chance at a normal life." "Normal?" Ashley appeared at the window, her beauty now twisted by rage and fear. "Do you know what normal would have been for her foster care, institutions? Her mother was dying, her father unknown. I saved her from that. I gave her a name, a home, everything a child could want." "You murdered her father," I countered, referring not to Matthew, but to the role he had embraced. "The man who loved her, who would have protected her from you once he learned the truth." Ashley's face contorted. He was weak, getting squeamish over what needed to be done, threatening to go to the police. What kind of father would choose doing the right thing over keeping his family together? Behind me, I sensed rather than saw the tactical team moving into new positions using our conversation as cover. I needed to keep her engaged, keep her attention fixed on me rather than their movements. Isabella isn't just a meal ticket, Ashley. She's a child with her own future, her own identity. Lydia would have wanted, "Don't you dare speak for Lydia." Ashley's voice rose sharply. Lydia was nothing. A rich girl dying alone because her family couldn't be bothered to visit. I was the one who sat with her, who listened to her pathetic hopes for a baby she'd never raise. I made better use of that child than she ever could have. Every word revealed more of the twisted justification Ashley had constructed for her actions. In her mind, she wasn't a thief or murderer, but a savior, rescuing Isabella from one fate while using her for financial gain. The perfect blend of altruism and avarice that allowed her to sleep at night. "Where is Isabella now?" I asked, trying to locate the child in the cabin's windows. "Is she safe? Is she frightened by what's happening?" "She's sleeping," Ashley replied, momentarily distracted by the question. I gave her something to help her rest through the move. She won't remember any of this. My blood ran cold at the implication. "What did you give her, Ashley? What medication?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. "Just something to help her sleep. She'll be fine. I know what I'm doing." James's voice came through the negotiator's radio loud enough for me to hear. "That's our cue. She's drugged the child. We move now." The next moments unfolded with breathtaking speed. The tactical team converged on the cabin from multiple entry points. I was pulled back to safety as commands echoed through the clearing. There was a single gunshot. Ashley had come prepared, followed by the crash of the door being breached. Then silence so complete it seemed to press against my eardrums. I held my breath, praying silently, desperately. Finally, movement at the cabin door. A tactical officer emerged, carrying a small bundle wrapped in blankets. Isabella, her dark hair spilling over the officer's arm, her body limp. I rushed forward despite hands trying to hold me back. "She's alive," the officer confirmed. "Pulse is steady, but she's heavily sedated. Medical team is standing by." Relief nearly buckled my knees as Isabella was transferred to waiting paramedics. They worked efficiently, establishing an IV line, checking vital signs, preparing for immediate transport to the hospital. James appeared at my side as Ashley was led from the cabin in handcuffs. Her perfect appearance now in disarray, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead where she'd apparently been injured during the breach. "You'll never keep her," Ashley spat as she passed me. "You're an old woman. What court would give you custody? Isabella will end up exactly where I saved her from. In the system forgotten." I met her gaze without flinching. "Unlike you, I don't see her as a possession to be kept. I see her as a child to be loved, to be given back the future you stole from her." Something flickered in Ashley's eyes. Not remorse, never that, but perhaps the first recognition that her carefully constructed world had truly collapsed. She would not charm or manipulate her way out of this. The evidence was too overwhelming, the crimes too heinous. As she was placed in a police vehicle, I turned my attention to what truly mattered. "I need to go with Isabella to the hospital." James nodded. "I've already arranged it. You can ride in the ambulance. I'll join you there after we secure the scene." The ambulance ride was a blur of anxiety and hope. The paramedics worked over Isabella's small form, monitoring her vital signs, assuring me that while she had been heavily sedated, the medication appeared to be something commonly used for pediatric procedures. Dangerous in the wrong dosage, but unlikely to cause permanent harm when administered by someone with medical training. At the hospital, Isabella was immediately taken for comprehensive evaluation. Blood tests, imaging, careful monitoring as the sedative gradually cleared her system. I waited outside her room, refusing offers of coffee or food, unable to focus on anything but the steady beep of monitors tracking her heart rate. Hours passed. James arrived with updates on Ashley and the expanding investigation. Hugh Palmer was cooperating fully, providing details on 7 additional murders across 3 states. Ashley remained defiantly silent, having demanded a lawyer immediately after processing. "We're building a case that will put both of them away for multiple life sentences," James assured me. "The DA is already talking about special circumstances given the calculated nature of the crimes and the vulnerable victims." I nodded, the legal consequences important but secondary to my immediate concern. "What about Isabella legally? What happens to her?" James's expression softened with compassion. That's complicated. Ashley falsified the adoption papers, but she is Isabella's legal guardian on all existing documentation. With both Ashley and Matthew unable to care for her, the court will appoint a guardian ad litem to represent Isabella's interests while determining permanent placement. And Lydia's family, the distant relatives who would have inherited if not for Isabella, we're tracing them now. Preliminary findings suggest second cousins scattered across the country, none of whom maintained contact with Lydia in the years before her death. A doctor emerged from Isabella's room, her expression cautiously optimistic. She's starting to wake up. The sedative is clearing her system normally. All tests show no evidence of any other substances or any physiological damage. Relief coursed through me. Can I see her? Briefly. She'll be disoriented, possibly frightened. A familiar face would help, but try not to overwhelm her with information she can't process yet. I entered the room slowly, my heart constricting at the sight of Isabella in the hospital bed. So small against the white sheets, dark hair tangled around her face, an IV line in her tiny arm. Her eyelids fluttered as I approached, opening to reveal those dark eyes so like her mother's. Confusion clouded her face momentarily before recognition dawned. "Grandma," I gently took her hand, mindful of the IV. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here." Her brow furrowed as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. "Where's Mommy?" How to answer that impossible question, I opted for simplicity. "Mommy's busy right now. The doctors wanted me to stay with you while you're feeling sleepy." She accepted this with a child's logic, more concerned with immediate comfort than complex explanations. "My head feels funny." "That's because you had some medicine that made you very sleepy, but it's wearing off now and the doctors are taking good care of you." Her eyes began to drift closed again, the sedative still partially in effect. "Will you stay, Grandma?" "Yes," I promised, squeezing her hand gently. "I'll be right here when you wake up." I maintained my vigil as Isabella slept, her small chest rising and falling with each breath, her face peaceful despite the chaos that had engulfed her young life. She didn't know yet that the woman she called mother had stolen her as an infant, had murdered the man she called father. Didn't understand that her entire identity was built on layers of deception so profound they were still being uncovered. How and when to tell her these truths became my preoccupation as I watched over her. At 5, she was too young to comprehend the full horror of her origins, yet she would inevitably have questions as the legal proceedings advanced. Where was her mother? Why couldn't she go home? Why was she staying with Grandma? Now James joined me later that evening, bringing news that both expanded the case against Ashley and complicated Isabella's situation further. Forensic accountants have traced approximately $28 million of Lydia's fortune to accounts controlled by Ashley under various aliases. The remaining $15 million is still unaccounted for. He lowered his voice, though Isabella remained soundly asleep. We've also identified Lydia's closest living relatives, a second cousin in Seattle and another in Chicago. Neither knew her well, but they're the legal heirs to whatever assets weren't claimed through Isabella. I considered this development. Will they challenge Isabella's claim to Lydia's estate? Try to invalidate her as heir because of how Ashley acquired her? That's one of many legal questions that will need resolution. The courts will have to determine if Isabella's status as Lydia's biological child supersedes the fraudulent means by which Ashley established guardianship. Another layer of complexity in an already tangled situation. And custody, who decides where Isabella lives while all this is sorted out. Family court will make that determination. As Matthew's mother, you have a strong claim for temporary guardianship, but the court will consider multiple factors: your age, your resources, your ability to provide long-term care for a young child. The quiet doubt in his voice reflected concerns I'd already considered myself. At 69, with modest retirement savings and a body increasingly betrayed by arthritis, was I the best guardian for a traumatized 5-year-old? Yet the alternative, placing Isabella with strangers or distant relatives who had no emotional connection to her, seemed equally problematic. "I won't let her become a pawn in a legal battle over money," I said firmly. "She's lost enough already." James nodded. "The guardian ad litem will be appointed tomorrow. They'll conduct a thorough assessment of all options with Isabella's best interests as the priority." Isabella remained hospitalized for observation over the next 2 days, gradually returning to her normal energetic self as the sedative cleared her system completely. I stayed by her side, sleeping in a recliner beside her bed, fielding her increasingly direct questions about Ashley's absence with gentle half-truths that would suffice until a child psychologist could help navigate the full disclosure. News of Ashley Harrison's arrest spread rapidly through local media, though careful reporting restrictions protected Isabella's identity and the most disturbing details of the case. Still, hospital staff whispered in corridors, their glances toward Isabella's room, a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. On the third day, Dr. Gloria Chen, the court-appointed guardian ad litem, arrived to begin her assessment. A petite woman in her 50s with a calm, authoritative manner, she spoke first with me in a private consultation room while a child life specialist stayed with Isabella. "Mrs. Harrison, I want to be transparent about this process," she began. "My job is to determine what arrangement serves Isabella's best interests going forward. That evaluation considers multiple factors: stability, emotional bonds, physical resources, support systems, and long-term sustainability of the placement." I appreciated her directness. "I understand. I want whatever is best for Isabella, even if that isn't me." Dr. Chen studied me with professional assessment. "You're her only consistent familial connection, which weighs heavily in these situations. But there are legitimate concerns about your age and health relative to raising a young child." "I'm not as spry as I once was," I acknowledged, "but I'm in good health overall. My home is paid for, I have adequate retirement income, and most importantly, I love Isabella. Not as a replacement for Matthew or as some kind of redemption story. I love her for herself." "What about support systems, family, friends, community resources you could rely on?" I thought carefully before answering. "I have a small circle of friends, mostly from church. Several have grandchildren Isabella's age. The elementary school near my home is excellent. And while I don't have family nearby, I do have the resources to hire help if needed." Dr. Chen made notes before continuing. "Are you aware of the potential legal complications regarding Lydia Summers' estate? Isabella may eventually inherit substantial assets, which creates additional complexities for any guardian." "I'm not interested in her inheritance," I said firmly. "If she's entitled to her mother's estate, that money should be held in trust until she's old enough to use it responsibly. My concern is her emotional well-being, not financial gain." Our conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering everything from my parenting philosophy to my understanding of childhood development to my plans for helping Isabella process the trauma she'd experienced. Throughout, Dr. Chen remained neutral and professional, revealing nothing of her developing assessment. Afterward, she spent time with Isabella, first observing our interaction, then speaking with the child privately while I waited anxiously outside. Isabella's perception of me, her comfort level in my presence, her overall emotional state, all would factor into Dr. Chen's recommendation to the court. When Dr. Chen emerged, her expression revealed nothing of her conclusions. "I'll be conducting additional interviews, hospital staff, your neighbors, possibly members of your church community, before submitting my report to the judge. In the meantime, the hospital is preparing to discharge Isabella tomorrow. Do you have temporary authorization to take her home with you?" James had arranged emergency temporary custody through the police department's Family Services Division, standard procedure when a child's legal guardian is arrested for serious crimes and no immediate alternative is available. It wasn't permanent, merely a stopgap until the court made formal determinations. "Yes, I have temporary authorization," I confirmed. "My home is prepared for her." Dr. Chen nodded. "I'll include discharge planning in my report. The court hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday. I'll have my full recommendation ready by then." After she left, I returned to Isabella's room where the child life specialist was helping her draw pictures. Isabella looked up with a smile that illuminated her entire face. "Grandma, look what I made ye." She held up a crayon drawing of two stick figures holding hands, one tall with gray hair, one small with black hair. Above them, a bright yellow sun beamed down from a blue sky filled with puffy clouds. A simple child's drawing, yet it conveyed everything I hoped might be possible. Safety connection, a future brightened by love rather than darkened by deception. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said carefully, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Is that us?" Isabella nodded enthusiastically. "That's you and me at the park. Can we go to the park when I get better, the one with the duck pond?" The normality of her request pierced my heart. Despite everything that had happened, she remained a child with a child's desires. To play, to explore, to enjoy simple pleasures without understanding the complex adult world collapsing around her. Yes, I promised. When the doctors say you're all better, we'll go to the park and feed the ducks. Her smile widened. And can we get ice cream after Mommy always says ice cream is for special days? The reference to Ashley brought reality crashing back. Soon we would need to begin the painful process of explaining why Mommy wouldn't be taking her for ice cream anymore, why she would be living with Grandma instead of in the house she knew as home. Ice cream is definitely part of the plan, I assured her, setting aside heavier thoughts for another day. What's your favorite flavor? As Isabella launched into a detailed explanation of why chocolate chip cookie dough was superior to all other ice cream options, I savored the moment of ordinary childhood joy. There would be time enough for difficult conversations, for tears and confusion, and the long process of healing. For now, this moment of connection was all that mattered, a small foundation of trust and love upon which we might build something new from the ashes of so much destruction. The courtroom felt cavernous, my footsteps echoing as I walked down the center aisle toward the front row. 6 weeks had passed since Isabella's rescue from the cabin, 6 weeks of temporary custody arrangements, psychological evaluations, and legal maneuvers that left my head spinning. Today, the judge would hear final arguments regarding Matthew's exhumation results and deliver a ruling on the murder charges against Ashley and Hugh Palmer. Isabella waited at home with Mrs. Winters, a retired elementary school teacher who had become our part-time caregiver and my most unexpected ally. At 5 years old, Isabella didn't need to hear the clinical details of how thallium had systematically destroyed her father's nervous system, how Ashley and Hugh had meticulously documented their poisoning schedule, how Matthew's skull showed evidence of multiple blows inconsistent with a fall downstairs. These grim facts were for adult ears only part of the justice we sought, but not part of the healing Isabella required. I settled into the polished wooden bench, straightening my navy dress, the same one I'd worn to Matthew's funeral, now hanging looser on my frame after weeks of stress and disrupted meals. James Roberts nodded to me from across the aisle where he sat with the prosecution team. He'd become more than just an investigator during these harrowing weeks. He'd become the sturdy pillar I leaned against when my own strength faltered. The side door opened and Ashley entered, flanked by corrections officers. Her blonde hair had lost its salon perfection, now pulled back in a simple ponytail that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. The designer clothes were replaced by a modest navy suit, an attempt to appear conservative and trustworthy before the court. Our eyes met briefly as she took her seat at the defense table. No emotion crossed her face, not anger or remorse or even the hatred I might have expected. She looked at me as one might regard an inanimate object, present but irrelevant. Judge Harriet Lowell entered, a formidable woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and piercing eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they landed on. She had a reputation for thoroughness and fairness, qualities I desperately hoped would guide today's proceedings. In the matter of Commonwealth versus Harrison and Palmer, we're here to consider the findings of the medical examiner regarding the exhumation of Matthew Harrison and to rule on whether sufficient evidence exists to proceed with first-degree murder charges. The prosecutor presented a methodical case backed by the medical examiner's testimony regarding thallium levels in Matthew's hairnails and bones. The poison had been administered over months, gradually increasing in dosage. The skull fractures showed distinct patterns consistent with strikes from a heavy object, likely a hammer found in the basement of Matthew and Ashley's home that contained microscopic traces of blood and hair despite having been meticulously cleaned. Most damning were the video recordings from Matthew's hidden cameras played in court despite defense objections. Watching Ashley prepare poisoned meals while casually discussing Matthew's deteriorating health with Hugh Palmer on the phone sent murmurs through the courtroom. Their clinical detachment, their occasional laughter at Matthew's confusion over his symptoms, painted a picture of calculated cruelty that no defense argument could mitigate. When Ashley's attorney presented her case, he attempted to paint Matthew as paranoid and controlling, suggesting he had fabricated evidence against his wife due to declining mental health caused by undiagnosed medical conditions. The argument fell flat against the mountain of forensic evidence and Ashley's own recorded words. Judge Lowell's ruling was unequivocal. The evidence presented establishes probable cause that the defendants engaged in a premeditated scheme to murder Matthew Harrison through both poisoning and blunt force trauma. The case will proceed to trial on charges of first-degree murder. A weight lifted from my shoulders, the first step toward justice for my son. Yet it was only the beginning of a long legal road that would include not just the murder trial, but also charges related to Lydia Summers' death, the theft of Isabella financial fraud across multiple states, and the deaths of Ashley's previous victims. The prosecutor estimated trials could stretch over 2 years, with both defendants facing multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered with cameras and microphones hungry for statements. I declined to speak, allowing James to issue a brief comment about the family's relief at the ruling while requesting privacy during the ongoing proceedings. The case had attracted national attention, with morning shows and true crime podcasts dissecting every detail that became public. I avoided all of it, focusing instead on the one thing that mattered more than justice or public vindication: Isabella's well-being. At home, I found her on the living room floor with Mrs. Winters building an elaborate structure with colorful blocks. Her dark hair had been trimmed recently, framing her face in a way that heightened her resemblance to the photographs we'd found of Lydia. When she saw me, she abandoned her creation and ran to me with outstretched arms. "Grandma, look what we made. It's a castle for princes and dragons." I embraced her, breathing in the clean scent of her hair, marveling at how children could create worlds of wonder, even while their real worlds were fracturing around them. "It's magnificent, sweetheart. Did you help the dragons and princes become friends?" Isabella launched into an elaborate explanation of the castle's diplomatic functions while Mrs. Winters gathered her things to leave. The older woman squeezed my hand as she departed, her expression conveying what words couldn't: sympathy for the court ordeal she knew I'd endured, solidarity in our shared mission of sheltering Isabella from the storm. That evening, after dinner and bath time and 2 bedtime stories, Isabella finally settled under the covers of her new bed in what had once been Matthew's childhood room. Stars projected across the ceiling from a nightlight, creating a peaceful galaxy that seemed at odds with the chaos of our circumstances. "Grandma, when is Mommy coming back? Is she still on her work trip?" The question I'd been dreading since her rescue, though we'd prepared for it with child psychologists and family counselors. They'd advised honesty appropriate to her age level, without graphic details that would only traumatize her further. "Sweetheart, we need to have a special talk about Mommy." I sat on the edge of her bed, taking her small hand in mine. "Mommy did some very bad things, and because of that, she has to go away for a very long time. She won't be coming back." Isabella's brow furrowed, trying to process this information. "Like when Tommy in my class hit someone and had to go to time out. A bit like that, but for grown-ups and for much longer." How to explain prison to a 5-year-old? There are places where adults who break important rules have to stay away from other people. Her lower lip trembled. "Did she do something bad to me?" The question pierced my heart. "No, sweetheart. The bad things weren't to you, but they mean you can't live with her anymore. You'll be staying with me from now on. Forever and ever." The legal reality was more complicated. The court would soon rule on permanent custody arrangements, weighing my petition against claims from Lydia's distant relatives who had emerged once news of her substantial estate became public. But for tonight, Isabella needed security, not legal nuance. "I hope so, sweetheart. I'm doing everything I can to make sure we stay together." She seemed to accept this, though sadness clouded her eyes. "Can I still keep my pictures of Mommy?" Another question the psychologist had prepared me for. Children often maintained attachment to parents who had harmed them, or others an attachment that needed to be respected even while establishing boundaries around the relationship. "Yes, you can keep your pictures. And someday when you're older, we'll talk more about Mommy and why she had to go away. But no matter what, I want you to know that you are loved very much. By me, by people you haven't even met yet, who knew your first Mommy, and by your daddy who loved you very, very much." "My first Mommy?" Isabella's perception was sharper than I'd anticipated. I hesitated, wondering if I'd said too much too soon, but the psychologist's words came back to me. Children can handle difficult truths if delivered with compassion and at their level of understanding. "Yes, sweetheart. Before you lived with Daddy and Mommy, you had another Mommy named Lydia who loved you very much. She got very sick before you were old enough to remember her. I have pictures of her that we can look at tomorrow if you'd like." Isabella considered this new information with the remarkable adaptability of children. "Did she look like me?" "Yes, she did. She had beautiful dark eyes just like yours." This seemed to satisfy her for the moment. She yawned, the emotional conversation having drained her limited energy reserves. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course." I stroked her hair gently as her eyelids grew heavy. "I'll be right here." As Isabella drifted into sleep, I remained beside her, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, marveling at the resilience of this child who had endured more trauma and upheaval in 5 years than most people experience in a lifetime. Yet here she was, finding moments of joy in block castles and bedtime stories, trusting me to guide her through the darkness toward whatever light we could find together. The custody hearing arrived on a Tuesday morning, the same courtroom, but with a different energy. Today wasn't about punishing those who had done wrong, but determining what would be right for an innocent child going forward. Isabella remained at home, though she had met multiple times with Dr. Chen and other court representatives who would speak on her behalf. Lydia's second cousins, Andrea Sumner from Seattle and Paul Winters from Chicago, sat across the aisle, both dressed in conservative business attire that spoke of comfortable but not extravagant means. I'd met them during preliminary hearings and found them to be decent people without the predatory interest in Isabella's inheritance I'd initially feared. They seemed genuinely concerned about Lydia's daughter's welfare, though neither had the capacity or desire to raise her themselves. "They're supporting your petition," James murmured as we waited for proceedings to begin. "Dr. Chen spoke with them yesterday. They believe Isabella belongs with you, given the established relationship and what she's already been through." Relief coursed through me. With the support of Lydia's family, my petition stood a much stronger chance of approval. Judge Catherine Moore, a family court specialist with 20 years' experience, entered and called the court to order. Unlike criminal proceedings, this hearing had a more conversational tone focused on gathering information rather than adversarial argument. Dr. Chen presented her comprehensive assessment, first detailing her observations of Isabella's interactions with me, her psychological evaluation of both of us, her interviews with community members and professionals involved in Isabella's care. Isabella displays a secure attachment to Mrs. Harrison, viewing her as a primary caregiver and source of emotional security during an extraordinarily traumatic transition. Their bond predates the recent upheaval established through consistent visitation, despite Ashley Harrison's attempts to limit contact. This existing relationship provides crucial stability for a child who has experienced profound disruption and loss. She addressed the concerns about my age directly. While Mrs. Harrison's age was initially a consideration, her excellent health, cognitive function, and energy level are consistent with someone a decade younger. More importantly, she has established appropriate support systems through her church community, hired help and local resources to ensure Isabella's needs will be met, even if her own health eventually declines. The financial aspects were discussed next. Dr. Chen had worked with court-appointed financial managers to develop a plan for Isabella's inheritance, a trust that would provide for her education and well-being while protecting the bulk of the assets until she reached adulthood. I would receive a modest stipend as her guardian to cover expenses related to her care, but the arrangement ensured I had no direct access to or control over Lydia's fortune. This structure protects Isabella's financial interests while allowing Mrs. Harrison to focus solely on her emotional and developmental needs, Dr. Chen concluded. Based on my comprehensive assessment, I believe placement with Eleanor Harrison represents the option most aligned with Isabella's best interests at this time and going forward. Andrea and Paul each spoke briefly, expressing support for my petition and requesting only that Isabella be given age-appropriate information about Lydia as she grew older, along with the opportunity to develop relationships with her maternal relatives through occasional visits and ongoing communication. Lydia would have wanted her daughter to know her roots, Andrea said, her voice thick with emotion. Not to replace the loving home Mrs. Harrison can provide, but to complement it with knowledge of where she came from. I nodded my agreement, having already determined that Isabella deserved to know her full history when she was ready to receive it. When my turn came to address the court, I spoke from the heart rather than prepared notes. Your Honor, I come before you not claiming any special qualifications or extraordinary resources. I'm a woman in my later years who believed her family raising days were behind her. But life rarely follows our expected paths. Through terrible circumstances, Isabella and I have formed a bond that transcends biological connection. We've become each other's anchor in a storm neither of us created, but both must weather. The courtroom remained silent as I continued. I can't promise I'll be the perfect guardian. I'll make mistakes, as all parents do. But I can promise that Isabella will be loved unconditionally, protected fiercely, and guided gently toward becoming whoever she is meant to be. I'll ensure she knows the truth of her origins, both the beautiful parts about Lydia and the difficult parts about how she came to be in my care. I'll foster relationships with her maternal relatives so she understands she belongs to a larger family tree with deep roots. And I'll do everything humanly possible to give her the stable, joyful childhood that both her biological mother and my son would have wanted for her. Judge Moore asked several pointed questions about my health, financial stability, and long-term planning for Isabella's care should my situation change. I answered honestly, acknowledging the realities of aging while detailing the arrangements I'd already begun establishing. A college fund separate from Lydia's estate, my updated will naming James Roberts as Isabella's guardian. Should something happen to me, the network of support I'd cultivated among friends and community resources. When all testimony concluded, Judge Moore took a brief recess to review the materials. The minutes stretched interminably as I sat with hands clasped so tightly my arthritic joints protested. James offered silent support beside me, while Andrea occasionally caught my eye with encouraging nods from across the aisle. Judge Moore returned with remarkable efficiency. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I find that placement with Eleanor Harrison serves the best interests of the minor child Isabella. Therefore, I am granting permanent legal guardianship to Mrs. Harrison with the stipulations regarding financial management and family visitation as outlined by Dr. Chen and agreed to by all parties. She looked at me directly. Mrs. Harrison, the court places its trust in you to provide a stable, nurturing environment for this child who has experienced extraordinary trauma. The stipulations regarding her inheritance are not reflections on your character, but standard protections the court establishes in cases involving substantial assets. Annual reviews will be conducted for the first 3 years to ensure the arrangement continues to serve Isabella's best interests as she grows. Relief and gratitude overwhelmed me as the judge concluded the hearing. It was official. Isabella would stay with me, would grow up in the home where Matthew had spent his childhood, would have the chance at a normal life despite the extraordinary circumstances of her early years. Andrea and Paul approached afterward, offering congratulations and exchanging contact information to arrange future visits. They seemed genuinely pleased with the outcome focused on Isabella's well-being rather than the financial implications of Lydia's estate. Lydia would be grateful knowing her daughter is with someone who truly loves her, Andrea said, squeezing my hand. That's all she would have wanted. James drove me home, both of us processing the magnitude of the day's events. It's a good outcome, Eleanor, the best possible under these circumstances. It feels like the beginning rather than the ending, I admitted. So many challenges ahead, explaining her history as she gets older, helping her process the trauma navigating relationships with Lydia's family. One day at a time, James counseled. That's all any parent can do. Parent. The word settled strangely in my consciousness. At 69, I had become a parent again, responsible for guiding a young life through the next 13 years and beyond. The magnitude of it was both terrifying and exhilarating. Isabella was building a block tower with Mrs. Winters when we arrived home. The moment she saw me, she abandoned her creation and raced toward me. Did the judge say I can stay with you forever? I knelt to her level, ignoring the protest in my knees. Yes, sweetheart. The judge said you'll live with me now. This is your home. Her arms encircled my neck in a fierce embrace. Good. I didn't want to go anywhere else. The simplicity of her response belied the complexity of emotions surely swirling beneath the surface. The psychologist had warned me that Isabella's adjustment would not be linear. There would be good days and difficult days, questions I couldn't fully answer. Grief, she couldn't fully articulate anger that might seem misplaced. The road ahead would not be easy for either of us. But for this moment, her acceptance and relief were enough, a foundation upon which we could build whatever came next. The criminal trials proceeded over the following months, each revelation more disturbing than the last. Ashley's network of crimes spanned 15 years in 7 states, with at least 11 confirmed victims beyond Matthew and Lydia. Hugh Palmer's cooperation secured him a marginally lighter sentence. Multiple life terms with possibility of parole after 30 years, rather than the 6 consecutive life sentences without parole that Ashley received. I attended key portions of the trials, bearing witness to the full scope of evil that had touched our lives. Isabella remained shielded from these proceedings, though she participated in ongoing therapy to process her experiences in age-appropriate ways. Slowly, carefully, we began introducing her to the concept that Ashley had taken her from her birth mother, framing it in terms she could understand about grown-ups making very wrong choices. As months became years, Isabella blossomed despite her traumatic beginnings. Her natural intelligence and creativity emerged in school projects and artistic endeavors. Her emotional resilience, while tested by nightmares and occasional behavioral regression, proved remarkably strong with proper support. By her 8th birthday, she had developed into a thoughtful, curious child with a particular interest in science and medicine, interests that sometimes reminded me painfully of Matthew. We established traditions with Lydia's family, summer visits to Andrea in Seattle, Thanksgiving with Paul's family in Chicago. Isabella collected stories and photographs of her birth mother, building an understanding of the woman who had carried her and loved her for the brief time they had together. On Lydia's birthday each year, we visited a local botanical garden that reminded Isabella of pictures she'd seen of Lydia's favorite places, leaving flowers and sharing memories. Ashley existed at the periphery of our lives, a shadow we acknowledged but did not allow to darken our present. Isabella occasionally asked questions about her, which I answered truthfully but appropriately for her age. Yes, Ashley had done very bad things. No, she would not be coming back. Yes, it was okay for Isabella to have complicated feelings about her. No, what happened wasn't Isabella's fault in any way. One evening, as I was tucking 10-year-old Isabella into bed, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Grandma, do you think I might grow up to be like Ashley since I lived with her for so long?" The question revealed fears she'd been harboring silently, fears that the woman who had raised her for her first 5 years might have somehow imprinted her dark nature onto Isabella's developing self. I sat beside her, choosing my words carefully. "No, sweetheart. People aren't like copying machines where who they live with determines who they become. You make your own choices every day about what kind of person you want to be. I see you choosing kindness and honesty all the time. Those choices show who you really are." She considered this, her dark eyes, so like Lydia's, serious in the soft lamplight. "But what if there's a part of me that's like her that I don't know about yet? We all have the capacity for both good and bad inside us, Isabella. What matters is which parts we choose to nurture and grow. Ashley chose selfishness and cruelty. You've already shown, even at your young age, that you're choosing compassion and empathy instead." This seemed to reassure her, though I suspected the question would return in different forms as she matured and grappled with her complex origins. Each time I would meet her concerns with honesty and the unwavering assurance that she was not destined to repeat Ashley's sins. As Isabella grew, so did my network of support. James Roberts remained a constant presence, transitioning from professional ally to personal friend, who often joined us for Sunday dinners. After his retirement from the police force, he dedicated time to volunteering with organizations supporting children affected by violent crime, occasionally bringing Isabella along to age-appropriate events where she could connect with others who understood aspects of her experience. Mrs. Winters expanded from part-time caregiver to honorary family member, her educational background proving invaluable as Isabella navigated academic challenges. My church community rallied around us with practical support. Rides to activities when my arthritis flared, home-cooked meals during busy periods, young families who included Isabella in outings when I needed rest. On Isabella's 15th birthday, we took a special trip to visit both Matthew's and Lydia's graves, now marked with connecting memorial benches where visitors could sit and reflect. Isabella had requested this visit, feeling ready to more fully connect with the parents she had lost before having the chance to truly know either of them. She placed flowers at both sites, lilacs for Matthew, white roses for Lydia. We sat together on one of the benches, the summer breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass across the peaceful cemetery. "Do you think they would be proud of me?" Isabella asked, her voice carrying the vulnerable uncertainty of adolescence, despite her typical confidence. "Without question," I replied, meaning every word. "You've faced challenges that would break many adults, yet you've developed such compassion, such strength. Both of them would be amazed by the person you're becoming." She leaned against my shoulder, a gesture that had become less frequent as she entered her teenage years and sought the independence natural to her age. "I wouldn't have survived without you, you know. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." The words touched me deeply, but I shook my head slightly. "We saved each other, Isabella. When I lost Matthew, I thought my purpose in life had ended. Through you, I found reasons to keep going, to build something beautiful from terrible loss. You've given me as much as I've given you, probably more." That evening, after we returned home, Isabella disappeared into her room briefly before returning with a package wrapped in lavender paper. "I made this for you. I've been working on it for months." I unwrapped it carefully to find a hand-knitted blanket in the same mint green shade as the one I had made for her as a baby. The stitches were even and tight, the work of someone who had practiced diligently to master the craft. "I taught myself from videos online," she explained. "I wanted to recreate the blanket that connected us, the one that saved my life." Tears filled my eyes as I ran my fingers over the soft yarn. "It's perfect, Isabella. The most beautiful gift I've ever received." That night I spread both blankets on my bed, the old one I had preserved all these years and Isabella's new creation. Side by side they told our story more eloquently than words ever could. The original blanket had concealed secrets that exposed a monster and saved an innocent child. The new one held no hidden objects, no evidence of crimes, only the love of a girl for the woman who had become her mother in every way that mattered. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about all we had endured and overcome. The pain remained, the losses real and permanent. Yet from that darkness, something precious had emerged. A family forged not through biology, but through choice, through courage, through the determination to create light where others had left only shadow. The original blanket had been our beginning, the catalyst that set everything in motion. But Isabella was our ending, the unexpected miracle that gave meaning to suffering. The future neither Matthew nor Lydia had lived to see, but would have cherished beyond measure. I whispered a final prayer for them both before sleep claimed me. Not the desperate pleas of years past, but a gentle thanksgiving for the gift their daughter had become and the privilege of guiding her journey. In Isabella, their legacy continued transformed by love into something neither death nor evil could diminish. In her, we had all found a form of resurrection, a path forward from graves of grief toward gardens of new possibility. And as Isabella slept down the hall surrounded by the photographs of both her birth parents and the many people who now constituted her chosen family, I knew with certainty that some stories, even those born in darkness, could end in light. Some journeys, even those beginning with loss, could arrive at destinations richer than their travelers ever imagined possible. The blank pages of Isabella's future lay before her, no longer predetermined by Ashley's manipulations or shadowed by secrets, but open to whatever wonderful story she chose to write upon them. The blanket that had once held evidence of death now symbolized something entirely different. The threads of lives intertwining broken patterns rewoven into new designs, the warmth of love outlasting the cold calculations of those who sought to destroy it. In that simple object, our story had come full circle, transformed from tragedy to testimony that even in our most vulnerable moments, truth finds its way to the surface, and love, true love, survives any darkness.